I heard that there was going to be a lecture at UCSF in Fresno about the status of abortion. Status of abortion in Fresno, in the state of California, and in the U.S. And it was going to be delivered by a doctor named Meg Autry, Dr. Meg Autry, who is the interim head of OBGYN services at UCSF Fresno. Now, I thought, okay, this is probably going to be a very left-wing leaning event. It was called UCSF Fresno does this thing Thursday evenings in September. They call it Mini Med School. And it's basically a program where they bring in different doctors to lecture about different topics of interest. And they have, this doctor's talking about sleep medicine. This doctor's talking about this, and this doctor's talking about that. And the lecture this past Thursday, one of the two, it's from 5 to 7, and this was the 5 to 6 p.m. slot, was about the status of abortion in Fresno, in California, and nationwide. And it's kind of open to, I think it's chiefly being marketed to medical students, maybe medical students who are doing stuff at UCSF, college students, etc. But it's open to the public. Registration's free. They had a Zoom webinar option, but I was like, I think I'll go. And, I have, I wasn't sure if I should register as Right to Life of Central California, John Girardi. And thankfully, I have a number of hats that I can wear now. So I've got Right to Life, John Girardi. I have Obria Medical Clinics, John Girardi. And I also have iHeartMedia, John Girardi, because I host the John Girardi Show. So iHeartMedia, John Girardi, registered for this event. And he decided to go. So I went and had a friend come with me. And I had a couple of other friends, some of the gang, shout out to Noelle and Addison from Fresno State Students for Life, who were joining on the webinar and were texting me snarkily throughout the course of this thing. Now, the lecture itself kind of was the biggest Zoom cluster you-know-what in human history. It started a half hour late and then cut out within like 5 or 10 minutes. So we didn't even actually really get the lecture very much, and it was not promising. This doctor who was presenting it does abortion, is an abortion provider, has been an abortion provider for years and years and years and years, very unapologetically pro-choice, and she was sharing a lot of the typical pro-abortion sort of party line, claiming at one point that abortion is safer than getting your teeth cleaned, abortion is safer than Tylenol, all of this stuff. And I was suspecting this level of bias and partisanship was going to be the case. This is UCSF after all, even if it is UCSF Fresno. UC San Francisco has the Bixby Center for Reproductive Health Studies. I'll Google here its exact name. The Bixby Center for Reproductive Health. All right. Which is at UC San Francisco. And the Bixby Center, its director is Dr. Daniel Grossman, who is one of the leading public policy, pro-abortion public policy advocates in the country, sort of at the intersection between medicine and public policy and abortion. And so pretty much anytime there's a major abortion bill at the state legislature, he comes to Sacramento to testify on behalf of it. So, and some of the stuff that Dr. Autry was saying in this lecture, it's the same party line that the UCSF crowd tends to use, including Dr. Grossman, especially the idea that the abortion pill is safer than Tylenol, which, if you listen to this show for a long time, you know that that's bunk. Okay, first of all, I think what they're doing is they're comparing the pill abortion process against people who overdose on Tylenol, which is not a fair comparison. That's an apples to oranges comparison, okay? That's people using the abortion pill as it's specified for use versus people overdosing on Tylenol. So not a fair apples to oranges comparison. An unfair apples to oranges comparison. But beyond that, it's also overlooking the fact that since 2016, the FDA has not collected any adverse health outcome data from the abortion pill. And it was right in 2016, there's the same body of regulations that loosened health and safety restrictions on the abortion pill, also eliminated the requirement to collect health and safety data. So what information we have about the abortion pill is with the old health and safety safeguards on it. Only use the abortion pill through the first 7 weeks of pregnancy. Only use the abortion pill after 3 in-person doctor's appointments, not 1. In 2016, it was loosened to up to 10 weeks into pregnancy, only 1 doctor's visit. And then in 2021, it was further loosened to no in-person visit required. Get your prescription for the abortion pill via telemedicine. Have the abortion pill mailed to your house. No requirement for an in-person visit. So what information we have about the adverse health outcomes from the abortion pill is only our information from up to 2016. Up to 2016, which is in 2016 was the moment when the abortion pill got severely deregulated. A bunch of the health and safety restrictions went out the window. And up to that point, we do have evidence of thousands of people being hospitalized for excessive bleeding, for hemorrhaging, for infection, for blood clotting. We know of 28 women dying from it. We also have anecdotal evidence of women being told, hey, if you have to go to the ER afterwards, don't tell them it was for chemical abortion. We have anecdotal evidence of women sort of being ashamed of the fact that they had an abortion and not telling the ER people that they had the abortion pill process, just saying, well, I'm miscarrying and I'm bleeding a lot. So this further demonstrates how silly the claim is that that abortion is as safe as a Tylenol or as safe as getting your teeth cleaned, because what information we do have about adverse health outcomes from the abortion pill is likely only the tip of the iceberg. Now, that was pretty much all I was able to get out of this woman's talk because she could not get her Zoom set up right. So I'm waiting on getting maybe her slides from her talk, for her PowerPoint slides, and maybe I can comment more on that next week's show. However, I did notice one little thing. On her very first slide, it said that she was the founder of an organization called Prowess. Prowess. So I kind of started Googling it, and I couldn't really find much about it. And so I had Noelle and Addison from Fresno State Students for Life, my comrades in arms. Not in arms, but my comrades. No one's using arms. I had them Google it, and they found it. This is a nonprofit, and subsequently I then found an NPR story about this. So let me read this NPR story. This is an NPR story from July of 2022. A floating abortion clinic is in the planning stage, and people are already on board. The Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade has made it harder for many pregnant people, oh, come on, NPR, really, to access abortion services, at least on land. One California-based doctor and activist has an idea. Why not offer them at sea? Dr. Meg Autry, an OBGYN and professor at University of California at San Francisco, has been mulling over this question since long before the Dobbs decision. She says she was inspired by the casino boats she would see in the Mississippi River while growing up in the South. As many states tightened their restrictions on abortion and dozens now moved to ban it altogether, Autry assembled a legal team to look into whether it might be possible to offer that care by boat. After assessing their options, they're working towards the goal of providing abortion services in federal waters in the Gulf of Mexico, though not without anticipated legal challenges and safety concerns. Autry created and runs the nonprofit Prowess, Prrowess, whose acronym stands for Protecting Reproductive Rights of Women Endangered by State Statutes. Let me just interrupt my reading of the article just to reiterate. This person wants to make an abortion clinic on a boat in the Gulf of Mexico in international waters, in which she intends to perform surgical abortions up to 16 weeks into pregnancy. This is the lecturer UCSF Fresno brings in to lecture to all their medical students and college students and stuff to teach them about abortion. Prowess is now fundraising, and they're fundraising to buy and retrofit a boat that can serve as a floating health clinic. The group hopes the clinic will offer all sorts of reproductive health and wellness services, including contraception, testing, and treatment for STDs, and surgical abortions up to 14 weeks. The website for Prowess says 16 weeks, not 14. So, by the way, we're talking second trimester abortions, which I don't want to talk about the exact detail of how a second trimester abortion is done, but let's say it's a lot more involved than a first trimester abortion. This is not easy surgery, okay? Complication rate is a lot more. But making that clinic a reality will take time, raise questions, and involve risks. Autry says it's worth it. After all, as she tells Morning Edition's Rachel Martin, this is her life's work. It's just not okay for people to not have bodily autonomy, she says, blah, 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 blah. How it would work? What happens if it doesn't? Okay, here we go. The nonprofit needs to clear significant financial and logistical hurdles before it can color in the exact details of the proposed operation. First and foremost, they need to raise enough money to acquire a vessel with a preliminary goal of $20 million. That vessel will need to be retrofitted to meet clinic standards, which Autry says could take 6 to 12 months. In an ideal world, she says the vessel would be operational in a year. It's still unclear what exactly that would look like, since the size of the team and number of procedures they'll be able to perform will depend on factors like the size of the vessel, union rules, and fuel costs. It's a pretty penny. But Autry estimates the crew could provide for about 20 patients a day, which comes out to roughly 1,800 people in 6 months. The vessel would operate in the swath of federal waters in the Gulf of Mexico, where its activities wouldn't be restricted by state laws. The exact distance from the coastline depends on the state, but Autry says it would be between 3 and 12 miles offshore. That is true generally. So an individual state has jurisdiction over waters usually about 3 to 9 miles out from its own coast. Then you get into federal waters. Then you get into international waters. So their idea is to operate in federal waters. So I think it's sort of a strip of water between like 3 and I think 20 miles off the coast. It anticipates primarily serving patients who reside in Texas, Louisiana, and other states along the Gulf Coast, many of which had trigger laws that immediately banned abortions. Now, they're also talking about how they're going to have basically a helicopter landing pad to transport people from there onto the boat. Now, when we return, I think I'm just going to keep talking about how completely insane this is. This is the extent that they will go to kill babies. They will fit out a boat to have a floating abortion clinic. When we return, we'll talk about other precedents for this from Europe. That is next on Right to Life Radio. Back with Right to Life Radio, we're talking about my little field trip over to UCSF Fresno, where I encountered a doctor who started a nonprofit whose goal is to start a floating abortion clinic. An abortion clinic that would operate in federal waters in the Gulf of Mexico, because Gulf states like Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida have all passed laws to restrict abortion. So, apparently this whole thing, and there was a whole NPR story about this, apparently this whole thing was kind of inspired by a Dutch vessel that is this Dutch boat that has gone to various countries around the world docked off the coast of those countries to provide abortions to women in those countries. So it's done this little tours to Ireland, to Mexico, to a bunch of other countries. So I think that organization was called Women on Waves or something. So this is, Women on Waves, which sails a ship to countries where abortion is illegal, docks about 12 miles off their coast, and provides patients with abortion pills and contraceptives. Now, I'm going through this NPR story about this. And again, this is a UCSF professor who UCSF Fresno is bringing in to talk about abortion to their medical students. This woman is a flat-out abortion activist. This is not some neutral person. This is the kind of med school education that young people are getting when it comes to abortion, is the most aggressive, hardline activism you could possibly fathom. Someone who is so dedicated to abortion that she has started a nonprofit whose goal is to start a boat where they're going to do surgical abortions up to 16 weeks into pregnancy in federal waters outside of Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida jurisdiction, so that they can do abortions. Now, here's one part of the story that is maybe unintentionally revealing. And by the way, this NPR story, nobody at NPR thinks, our audience would find this, most Americans would find this to be absolutely goo-goo gaga insane. Maybe we get someone to offer the opinion that this is a bad idea. Nope. They couldn't be bothered. The folks at NPR couldn't be bothered to find anyone who would say, abortion's on a boat. That sounds, what if you have a medical emergency? How's that going to work? You're going to have a helicopter pad on the boat? How are you going to get it? What if, what if you have a ruptured uterus or something? What if something really bad happens? How does a floating abortion clinic, how is it licensed? How do you have admitting privileges at a hospital in Texas or Louisiana or whatever who's on land? How do you transport patients who are having a medical emergency? Here's how NPR talks about it. Autry, so this is Dr. Meg Autry from UCSF, who was supposed to deliver this talk I went to yesterday. Unfortunately, she couldn't figure out how to work Zoom, which again makes me wonder, if it's 2023 and you still can't figure out how to do Zoom, do I really want you performing a surgical procedure on me? Anyway, Autry and her team are much less concerned about the medical aspects of it all. Oh, good. Glad you're not concerned about the medical aspects of a floating medical clinic where you're going to do surgical abortions on a boat. Less than 1% of patients require emergency care from an abortion-related complication, Prowess says. Yeah, but if your plan is to serve 1,800 patients in a year, that's not zero patients. That's the thing with emergencies. They don't happen all the time, but you need to kind of be ready for them. Because you're a doctor performing a surgery. Less than 1% of patients require emergency care from an abortion-related complication, the nonprofit says, adding that it has planned for medical emergencies and will be prepared to transport patients to land by water shuttle or helicopter, depending on the urgency. The nonprofit says that the military and relief organizations have used floating clinics for years, and that its research indicates patients are willing to seek this type of care. Yeah, military and relief organizations do that not because they want to. They do that because of dire threats of some sort, meaning that our next best, or because the medical infrastructure in the country is non-existent. So, all right, so this aircraft carrier has a better medical, a better operating room than anything we're going to have, in some poor, impoverished third world country. So, yeah, we'll dock off the shore. It's probably better to do it here on this aircraft carrier that's so big that you barely even feel the ocean moving. So, but again, though, this is I'm trying to find what's the moral of the story here. And I don't know. It's like, it's hard for me to keep up the mindset of, judge not lest you be judged. I can judge the objective morality of what these people do, which I believe objectively what they are doing is deeply, deeply wrong. It's deeply offensive to human life and human dignity. It is objectively speaking, what they are doing is the killing of innocent human beings, which is murder. And I have I've always sort of taken the approach in my pro-life advocacy that I'm not going to judge people's, even abortion doctors, I'm not going to judge their subjective intent. I am guessing that there are doctors who do this because subjectively, deep down, they think they're doing something that's helping women. They genuinely believe they're doing something to help women. It gets, and I'm going to maintain that. I'm just saying it gets hard when you know the reality of what a second trimester abortion is, what you do in a second trimester abortion. The rubber meets the road of what you do when you are actually performing a second trimester abortion or even a first trimester abortion. Literally vacuuming up a human organism in a first trimester abortion. Literally dismembering a human organism in a second trimester abortion. To go to this length to do that, it's very hard. It's very hard for me to maintain, it's very hard for me to maintain what has happened here. And maybe it's just a thing of her conscience has been deadened by the number of times she has done this. She's so rationalized this in her mind that she's now believing her own, believing what she says about it to herself. But it's hard. It's hard. I think they've probably figured it out that they can do this legally. I wonder if different state governments could try to do things. Could the Attorney General of Texas, Louisiana, whatever, are there ways they could try to stop this, limit this, hinder this? I don't know. I mean, the pro-abortion side's got a lot of money. They got a lot of lawyers. They got a lot of smart people. I'm sure they're figuring out ways to do this legally. But boy, it's hard to think of good motives for second trimester abortions at sea. Literally, that's what these people want to do. All right, when we return, I want to talk about the idea of re-paganizing our culture with a really interesting piece from First Things and a little bit of history of the Roman Empire when it comes to the topic of abortion. That's next on Right to Life Radio. I read maybe the most interesting piece I've seen, one of the more interesting pieces on the abortion topic and broader cultural questions. It was written by Louise Perry for the publication First Things, and it's called We Are Repaganizing. And it caught my attention because I love Roman history. I was a classics major in college. There's this joke meme going around where basically women are saying, it will astonish you how much your man is thinking about the Roman Empire. And it's these TikTok videos of women asking their husband or their boyfriend or something, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And all these guys that you wouldn't expect to care about the Roman Empire are saying, yeah, I think about it quite a bit. like it's more often than you'd think. I don't know why. Maybe it's just guys like history and the Romans' interest. I don't know what it is. It's I don't know. I think some people are trying to spin it into this is toxic masculinity or something. Anyway, so I am very interested in Roman history. And I remembered one of the most interesting things I learned about Roman history. I took a class about, it was a class about the archaeology of the city of Pompeii. So the city of Pompeii near Mount Vesuvius, which was destroyed by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. You'd think it was destroyed by Mount Vesuvius. Sort of paradoxically, the city of Pompeii is the best preserved city practically of the entire Roman Empire because it was covered with volcanic ash, and the volcanic ash actually had the effect of keeping everything preserved and locked down, as opposed to stuff that was exposed to the atmosphere and the rain and snow and the slow marching approach of time that broke down all these things. We actually learn a ton about Roman history and culture and attitudes by the excavations of Pompeii. And one of the things, I had this class about it, and it was sort of a Roman culture class. And the thing that sort of astonished me was learning about Roman sexual attitudes. The professor actually, I'm not making a judgment here. I'm just telling you what the professor thought. The professor basically said that Roman conceptions of sexuality were very different from ours. They had no concept of people as, quote, homosexuals or, quote, heterosexuals as like a static identity. In Rome, sexuality was really an expression of power, where if you were a wealthy Roman male citizen, you basically could have sexual relations with anyone lower than you in the pecking order. So if you had female slaves, have sex with your female slaves. If you had male slaves, have sex with your male slaves. Wife, whatever. If you had, and it also sort of indicated, it was a real indication of the genuine brutality of being someone weak and without status in the Roman world. Being a woman, being a child, being a slave. You were subject to various kinds of sexual predation, sexual and physical predation, in ways that are kind of horrifically shocking. But that was the Roman approach to sexuality. That it was an expression of power and dominance, and that reality was challenged and within the Roman Empire ultimately legally abolished by the rise of Christianity. The conception of Christianity of saying that it's actually the weak who must be protected, that there is value and dignity in every single human person. In Christ, there is no slave, nor free, nor woman, nor man. And ideas from Christianity, which frankly, this is not just a purely Christian conception, it also has its roots in Judaism. I mean, the idea of Judaism, that the prophets of the Old Testament were judging the people of Israel on the basis of, you're not caring for your widows, you're not caring for your orphans, you're abusing strangers and sojourners in your land. For these reasons, God's going to punish you. That was a wildly radical idea in the broader pagan world. The pagan world in which, frankly, might made right. And if you were powerful, you exercised your power over other people. And slavery was never viewed as being bad or a violation of human dignity. Slavery was bad because I don't want to be a slave. Slavery was viewed as bad as an indication of, man, that guy sucks. That's why he's a slave. Slavery was, to Aristotle, an indication that this person was fit to be a slave. This was someone who didn't have the natural capacity to not be a slave. I love Aristotle. I think Aristotle's brilliant. Aristotle does not have a perfect batting average. Now, Aristotle was deeply, deeply wrong. Let me clarify that. It was more than a batting average problem. He was deeply, deeply wrong on that topic. All right. Now, this brutal approach to sexuality necessarily in the Roman world resulted in a brutality towards unwanted children. There's a poem. So this piece in First Things, is written by Louise Perry, and it's called We Are Repaganizing. She writes, there's a very short and very brutal poem by the Scottish poet Holly McNish, written in 2019, entitled Conversation with an Archaeologist. This is how the poem goes. He said they'd found a brothel on the dig he did last night. I asked him how they knew. He sighed. A pit of babies' bones. A pit of newborn babies' bones was how to spot a brothel. Think about it. That's how you know in the Roman Empire that you've come across a brothel. You find the buried remains of male infants, not female infants, male infants. Because this was a common practice in it's male infants because if it's girls, they could be raised a couple of years later to be in the brothel themselves. And this was a very common thing, not just in the Roman Empire, but in a lot of pagan cultures, was what do you do with a child who is unwanted, perhaps because of the brutal power dynamics of utilizing one's sexuality? If you were a powerful Roman male, powerful, wealthy Roman citizen male, and you had relations with your slave and she conceived your child, and maybe you don't want one of your children hanging around as conceived by a slave, you could tell the slave to go kill that child. To do the Roman practice was called exposure. Leave the child at the crossroads, leave the child in the forest, where if you leave the child at the crossroads, maybe the child will be picked up and become a slave for some other family, or the child will just be left to die. And this was commonly done in all kinds of pagan cultures for children who might be difficult to take care of because maybe they have some physical deformity or something like that. Maybe you didn't want a girl. The Roman historian Tacitus, who was writing in, I believe, the 3rd century AD, was astonished at the Jewish people within the Roman Empire. And the thing that astonished him about them was that they kept having children after they had already set their wills. So his idea was, why would you keep having children after you set your will? You're just splitting up your estate. So what were Romans doing? Well, they were likely killing any unwanted children they have. There was not a lot of effective forms of contraception. And we do see within the Roman Empire that while there weren't very effective forms of contraception, they did indeed try. They tried to do things that were contraceptive, and they tried to do things that were abortifacient. Abortion was often attempted, practiced, etc. Now, it's very dangerous to do abortion in a pre-antibiotics world. Any kind of surgical abortion would be extremely dangerous. Romans often practiced what was called pharmakeia, which was going to various kinds of witch doctor, shaman type guys who would give you a magic potion for whatever ailed you. And very often people would go to these pharmakeia practitioners, that's the Greek word, to get some kind of pessary or something to induce a miscarriage. And in fact, St. Paul specifically condemns this practice of pharmakeia twice. I think it was in the letter to the Ephesians, and I know it's also condemned in the book of Revelation. Now, most English Bibles, it's a difficult concept to translate with one word. It's one of these things where St. Paul has a list of here's a bunch of bad things, don't do. So often it's translated as like witchcraft or something, but it was a little more specific than that. And could directly include abortion. So if someone ever says to you, hey, the Bible never condemns abortion, say, pharmakeia. There you go. Now, this piece by Louise Perry is talking about how our culture is repaganizing. And one of the things she talks about is that modern-day feminism, by abandoning a Christian conception of the world, is almost sawing the branch that it's sitting on out from under it. Sawing off the tree branch that it's sitting on. Because the very idea of women having any equality with men has Christianity as its root. It's undeniable that the status of women before and then after Christianity, it was miles better. The very idea that a woman of a lower social status should not be raped was a Christian idea, okay? Christians kind of kept having slaves. Christianity is the only religion that ever actually banned slavery, okay? Or mitigated the terms of slavery over the first millennia or so of Christianity, and then eventually actually outlawed slavery. So, and frankly, the sexual attitudes that Christianity was promoting was so much better for women than what the pagan world had allowed. So for feminism to reject the Christian ethic of preserving those who are weak in favor of this autonomy, I mean, basically the arguments in favor of abortion, in favor of bodily autonomy, are an expression of the strong against the weak, which very much harkens back to pagan times. Now, when we return, I want to talk a little bit about how the assisted suicide movement is sort of playing into all this. But the basic idea is that by getting away from a Christian ethic of valuing the weak, we are going to lead to a culture that punishes the weak because we can get away with it. That's next on Right to Life Radio. Back with Right to Life Radio, we are talking about this fantastic piece from First Things, written by Louise Perry, which is talking about the repaganization of culture. How we are seeing basically, and one of the things she talks about is she goes to this piece written by T.S. Eliot in the early 20th century, where Eliot was sort of, I think, very accurately predicting what the future of the world as far as ethics was going to be. Either it's going to be a Christian direction where we rehold Christian ethical conceptions of things, and not, I guess, exclusively Christian, broadly Judeo-Christian, or we return to paganism. And in his conception, paganism is in rejecting the Christian ethic of valuing the weak in the face of the strong, it will default to what has been the norm throughout most of world history, which is the strong dominating the weak. And I think that's clearly what's happening here. There is a kind of logic to some of the most logically consistent pro-abortion activists to say that there's nothing actually very special about humanity as such, and therefore that's why abortion is okay. That's why assisted suicide, directly killing someone because they have some serious illness or something, is okay. Heinrich Himmler once said, "There is nothing particular about man. He is but a part of this world." I think that's kind of the ethic that people like Peter Singer have. And we looked at Canada. Canada is killing people because they can't afford healthcare. They're offering, instead of treatment for your cancer, why don't we just assisted suicide you? It seems as though they're also leaning towards euthanizing children with serious ailments. So this is the repaganization of culture, promoting the strong against the weak. That will do it for Right to Life Radio. We'll see you next time on Power Talk.